Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. This show is being recorded on December 26, 2022. I'm Asbed Bedrossian and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. So the major topic this week is, of course, the Artsakh Blockade, and we'll touch on aspects such as the role of the Armenian government, relations with Russia, latest draft on so-called peace proposal, and weekend protests in Artsakh. To talk about this, we have with us Yeghia Tashjian, who is a regional analyst and researcher based in Beirut with expertise in China, Iran, and the Persian Gulf. Tashjian is Associate Fellow at the Sam Ferris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut, and a part-time instructor in International Affairs at the American University for Science and Technology. Hello, Yeghia. Glad to have you on the show.
Hello, Asbed. Thank you.
Hello, Yeghia.
Hello, Hovik. Hello, everyone.
For the past 2 weeks now, we've been covering the Artsakh blockade almost daily on our podcasts and videos. So let's take a step back from the daily trauma and look at the drivers behind this crisis. We know that the Russian peacekeepers have been put in a very precarious position by the Turkish-Azeri alliance, which is taking advantage of a time when Russia is tied up dealing with the war in Ukraine and needs to play soft with them in order to not open additional fronts in the global Russia-West conflict. So I'd like to ask you a two-tiered question, Yeghia. How is Russia doing in general? And what is your assessment of the job that the Russian peacekeepers are doing around Artsakh during this crisis, the blockade, etc.?
So basically, the main objective of Russia is to put an end to the war in Ukraine with an outcome that favors actually Russia. This is something that it will not happen in the short run because at the same time NATO is putting all its resources to some extent and arming Ukraine. So basically Ukraine is turning into another Syria in Eastern Europe, into a proxy war between this time and NATO and Russia. That is why I think it is a long war. And unfortunately, this will have negative implications on South Caucasus and also Central Asia. Because we are seeing that Russia's influence is decreasing. And on the other hand, we see new, let's say, major regional powers such as Turkey is trying to fill this gap. The problem is that the Iranians, they have limitations in South Caucasus, unlike in Middle East, so they cannot be big players there. So this is one of the reasons that actually Russia now it needs Turkey, because at the same time Russia and Turkey are working on a project of making Turkey an energy hub, so that Russia can export its oil and gas to Europe via Turkey. So basically this is a win-win solution for the Russians and us at the same time for the Turks, because the Turks were eager to become an energy hub. So basically, this is why Russia needs. And another implication is that, or another reason is that to freeze the conflict in Syria and Libya. Russians are not ready to go to war there if something happens. So this is why they need the Turks in order to freeze the conflict. And this is why sometimes as a typical chessboard that they have to compromise in some areas to give some boost. For example, when the grain deal that happened in Turkey, actually, where UN, Ukraine, and Russia were also part, this was to some extent green light by Putin given to Erdogan to boost his diplomatic credibility, which Erdogan will use it to enhance his, let's say, or consolidate his power before the next year general and presidential elections. At the same time, it is a good opportunity for Russia because Russia is bringing Turkey into its orbit. But this is an assumption that I don't think the Turks are convinced, because based on at least my interviews with some Western experts, they think that Turkey is just playing its role and waiting the exact moment so that Russia will become very weak and then Turkey will move towards more assertive foreign policy in the region. So basically, the Russians now need Turkey. They cannot antagonize Turkey.
How is NATO doing internally with Turkey and also the accession of some of the Scandinavian countries not going forward at this present time?
Actually, there was an assumption, at least the situation, if we will compare between 2020 and 2022, there was huge issues between the NATO and Turkey, especially with France, Germany, and Turkey. But now, after the Ukrainian war, NATO needs Turkey more. So basically, this relation is asymmetric in favor of now Turkey, because Turkey is a neighboring country to Russia. Turkey is also arming Ukraine. When I met some Ukrainians, they told me that Turkey is the main ally of Ukraine in the region and not just NATO, because Germany and France, they are hesitating to support Ukraine, but Turkey is openly supporting. So NATO also sees the expansion of Turkey in South Caucasus and Central Asia positively. For example, when we see that Azerbaijan's army is integrating into Turkish army, it means that Azerbaijan's army is integrating into NATO's army.
Right.
So this is something like a dream for NATO, because they already have Georgia, and now Azerbaijan is integrating in NATO's army and security apparatus. So basically, everything is going well to them. When it comes to Sweden and Finland, there are issues, especially in Sweden, because you have the Kurdish diaspora there, very active, and there are many, let's say, Gülenist or Kurdish activists that are being deported now to Turkey, and this is at the same time, a lot of NGOs and human rights organizations in Sweden are pressuring the Swedish government. So Sweden is in dilemma whether they will try to implement all the conditions that Turkey is imposing on them, because it is their dream and objective to enter NATO, or they will try to at least postpone and see what will happen after the elections. I don't see that Sweden and Finland actually joining NATO before the Turkish elections, because Turkey every time is putting on them new conditions.
Is there pressure on Sweden from the US and other members of the EU to accede to these demands by Turkey to turn over those Kurdish refugees?
Actually, I haven't realized that, at least because when I met some, at least one or two Swedish journalists and human rights activists, they didn't tell me or inform me that there was a pressure from Western countries, whether US or the EU. Because as we know that there are some EU countries, even the US, I mean, they have problem with Turkey when it comes to human rights violations and so on. So I don't think they will pressure Sweden. As I said, it's a dilemma even for the Western countries and NATO, because at the same time, they want Sweden and Finland to join, because at the same time, they are neighboring countries to some extent to Russia, and they can also contain Russia from the north. But at the same time, they don't want to provide a lot of consensus for Turkey. So I think eventually they will come up with a compromise solution.
But in either way, you're saying basically that this war in Ukraine has been a diplomatic and an economic windfall for Turkey. On the part of the Armenian government, mostly the Armenian government has been on a global diplomatic offensive during this blockade. Last Monday, the UN Security Council convened at Armenia's request to discuss the situation in Artsakh. We heard a lot of statements from the UNSC members bemoaning the crisis, urging the reopening of the Lachin corridor. But what we didn't hear was any condemnation of Azerbaijan or resolutions by the UNSC mandating remediation of this situation. Why do you think that Armenia did not introduce a draft resolution, despite having the right to do so as a party to the discussion area?
Even if Armenia was going to introduce, then Russia was going to veto it. So it was going to be very humiliating for both Armenia and Russia. I think this was the best outcome, because for the Russians, they don't want, whether under UN or NATO or even, let's say, other countries such as France, US, and Great Britain, members of the UNSC permanent seats, so to interfere in the South Caucasus. Maybe this was also coordinated between Moscow and Yerevan, I'm not sure. But definitely, because the Russians didn't want to put the Armenians in a very complicated situation, and neither the Armenians wanted to put Russia in a very difficult situation. At the same time, I mean, I was not expecting something more. This was condemnation, even though some countries were shy to mention the word Azerbaijan. I was not surprised, of course, the Russian position. The Russian position is very clear, and we cannot expect more from Russia at this now.
So what role should the Armenian government be playing in overcoming this crisis?
The Armenian government is handicapped, not because of the current, let's say, the Russian and Turkish competition in the region, but also because the failure of the Armenian diplomacy during the past 2 years. So it's like if you are, let's say, if you're a lazy student and you always get that 40 over 100 in your all exams, and if you do your final exam very good and you bring 80, it doesn't mean that you will succeed and you'll pass the grade. So basically, this is it. Every time we were thinking that, okay, the trilateral statement will save us. This was somehow the first step towards a peace agreement. We were even promising the people that by the end of the year, a peace agreement was going to be signed, everything optimistic. And then we have realized that no, the problem is that Armenia is every time providing compromise, but in return, we are not taking anything in return from Azerbaijan or Turkey. The issue is Turkey, it's not Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is becoming proxy of Turkey. Aliyev is nothing just a proxy of Erdogan. Right. The issue is Erdogan. Do we have a contact with Erdogan? Can we please him? I don't know. Pashinyan knows better than me, and also Ruben Vardanyan, because he was the one special envoy when it comes to the Armenian-Turkish dialogue or whatever. I don't know what Armenia can give Turkey so that at least Turkey can calm Azerbaijan because we already played all our cards. But in diplomacy, there is nothing impossible. I always say that relations with India became threatened. This is something very positive, and I was pushing this at least from 2019 when I first visited New Delhi. I'm happy about it, but also we need much better relations also with the Iranians. I always say the Iranians are our neighbors, whether we like it or not. We should not be shy to talk with the Iranians. I think also that Pashinyan's government, de facto now they will remain. Let's face this, the opposition will not be able to do anything. So basically, this government will remain at least in the coming year. So basically, because Pashinyan's government also they have good relations with the Americans and the Europeans, I think they can convince them that we have to have good relations with the Iranians and also not just economic but also strategic. The Iranians made their move. They established a consulate in Syunik. I think the next step, yes, should be that we establish a consulate in Tabriz because we know that Azerbaijan will be at least this will be a symbolic hurt to Azerbaijan because as we realize that the Azerbaijanis also they have this irredentist claim arguing that Tabriz is part of the greater Azerbaijan and so on. So we can play also emotional cards here. At the same time, I don't know if there were rumors, I think, a month ago or so that Iran is selling drones to Armenia.
Yeah.
I will not confirm or deny, I don't know, but if it is true, then this is great. We don't need to make everything public. If not, then we should do it. Because we need to at least try not change the balance of power. It's impossible because Azerbaijan is backed by Turkey, but we are not backed fully by Russia. So, but at least become a player in the region. This is what Armenia can do. At the same time, raise Artsakh's issue in international arenas and also talk about self-determination. Let's not be shy talking about self-determination. Self-determination doesn't mean just independence or annexation. They have different meanings. At least we can use this word and then we can explain the meaning of what we demand. I've also raised the humanitarian issue because this is important, at least to include the International Red Cross and maybe UNHCR and other international agencies into Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh because they have to have a presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. This is very important, not just to have the Russian peacekeepers because the Russian peacekeepers also have a limited mandate, but to bring international at least humanitarian NGOs and agencies is very important because this will also legitimize the existence of an entity in Artsakh.
You previously mentioned that Russia would veto the UN Security Council resolution if Armenia did introduce it. And I want to dig a little bit into this. Basically, Russia's stance in general has been either neutral or even some would say pro-Azerbaijani. For instance, Russia portrayed the blockade of Azerbaijan as a conflict over the mining rights, not a violation of the November 2020 tripartite statement. And then Friday, when basically Arat Mirzoyan basically snubbed both Lavrov and Bayramov and didn't attend Moscow, but at least based on Russia's allegations, that's what happened. They're both very critical and basically criticized Armenia for being undiplomatic. And Bayramov was allowed to spew any type of propaganda that he wants. What is driving Russia to veto, or what would drive Russia to veto a resolution if Armenia did introduce it? And, is it worth it for Russia? What is Russia standing to gain? And isn't Azerbaijan also sort of somehow in this, wouldn't Azerbaijan also lose in this game if, for instance, Armenia tried to escalate and make the cost of Russia and Turkey and Azerbaijan cooperation higher?
Basically, if the let's say if a resolution was passed, it means that the UN Security Council was going to directly intervene in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict from the Russian perspective. So everything the Russians did with the trilateral statement, where they sidelined the OSCE Minsk Group chairperson or chair countries, that is France and US. Then with this UN Security Council resolution, the Americans and the French and the Europeans were coming back to the region. This is something that the Russians they didn't want to. This is why they tried to cooperate with Turkey.
How about an alternative scenario where could Russia, even in this stage of the war, could Russia gain endorsement of their peacekeeping operation and the mandate from the UN Security Council without having the French and the Americans involved?
It
Would
will
the
not
West go for
happen
that?
because, unfortunately, I mean, this is what I have asked when I was in Sweden with some European, let's say, experts or advisors, that whether there is any type of cooperation can happen in the future in South Caucasus with the Russians. They were like, no. Their answer was no. And this means that Armenia will become a proxy in the future. Hopefully not Ukraine too, but it seems we are heading towards that scenario, that the Europeans, or at least the NATO countries, are not ready to cooperate or give any legitimacy to the Russians. Their aim is to kick the Russians from there, even at the expense of the Armenians. And this is why I think it has been almost 3 months that the Azeris or the Azerbaijanis are not attacking at Armenia, because the EU observers are just there and so on, because they know that if they attack Armenia, then they will mobilize the whole European Union against them. So there will be sanctions and so on. But they can attack Nagorno-Karabakh because from European perspective, Nagorno-Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan. So the Europeans will not react because they will see it as an internal affair in Azerbaijan. But if Azerbaijan attacks Armenia, then of course there will be repercussions and maybe sanctions in the future also.
But at the same time, I think that Russia is interested in staying in the region too, right? So do you see Armenia's basically stance right now in terms of antagonizing Russia or publicly blaming Russia? Isn't that equivalent to let's introduce a resolution and see where the cards fall? Because what does Armenia have to lose?
My concern is that if the resolution was introduced and let's say Russia was going to be vetoed, then there was going, I mean, the anti-Russian sentiment already, which is high in Yerevan, it was going to reach its peak.
Right.
And the opposition was going to be more isolated. Basically, actually, the Azerbaijanis are also playing this card. That is why they are provoking the Armenians and they are provoking the Russians at the same time, so that they see that the Armenians and the Russians are publicly accusing each other, so that there will be a tension between them. And it seems that Azerbaijan, until now, it is very successful in doing this thing. The Armenians are falling in this trap, and the Russians are unable to respond to the Azerbaijanis. They know that they are humiliated, but they know that also until now, I mean, until the war of Ukraine is finished, they cannot respond. They have to swallow the humiliations. And I'm not sure if they will respond in the future or not, because I'm not sure after the outcome or the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, what type of Russia will be emerged. Whether more aggressive Russia or new kind of Russia, or I don't know. I have a lot of fears in this issue,
Right.
because I know that there will be a huge impact on Armenia.
So, I mean, let's just drill down into this one specific issue that was used as a pretext for the latest siege on Artsakh. I'm sure there'll be many more in the future with tractorists and agriculturists, but this time the environmentalists came and said that we're concerned about the environmental impact of the Tashjian mine. You must let us inspect it. And Artsakhists, I think, on their part, retorted by saying, you know what, there are several mines that came into Azerbaijan's temporary control after the 2020 Artsakh war, and we also want to find out about their status. So they're at least trying to stake their claim to their territorial integrity and their sovereignty over these territories. And then they sort of they called for international inspectors, UN inspectors. I think, from what your previous answer said, I think Azerbaijan is going to not agree with that. But is there some kind of a diplomatic solution that Russia may try to broker that would cool down this issue at least enough so that Artsakhists are able to come and go freely to their homeland and connect with Armenia?
Yeah. So basically, I think the Azerbaijani plan was to take control. I mean, we know that the Anglo-Asian British company, it was granted all these areas and so on, so I will not go detail there. So basically, from the Azerbaijan perspective, the idea was that the Azerbaijanis were going to gain control over all these mines in Artsakh and then deprive Artsakh from profit and anything. And then Artsakh was going to be economically also integrated in Azerbaijan. And this is very like old British and also Soviet theory that to integrate Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, because there is economic link. So even because it's important that many Azerbaijanis were saying that when the gas supply were cut off, they were like, okay, we can provide gas to Nagorno-Karabakh. It's not a problem. So basically, this is what Azerbaijan is pushing to integrate economically, at least, Nagorno-Karabakh into Azerbaijan. Of course, I mean, we were not surprised because, as I said before the interview, so basically when I was in Europe and in one of my panels, there was also Azerbaijani expert. He was saying that if the peace agreement was not going to happen by the end of the year. So Azerbaijan was going to see all its options, meaning that we were going to war or escalation. And it seems this was escalation. And it was very clear that he was trying to put a parallel or draw a parallel between the Lachin corridor and the so-called Zankezur corridor. And basically, to be very passive, I don't think that the Lachin corridor will be opened without Azerbaijan getting at least a guarantee that something in Sunik will be opened to Azerbaijan. Whether that's a corridor or not, we don't know. But Azerbaijan will not open. At least this is my very passive assumption. Hopefully, it will not be true. But Azerbaijan will not open the Lachin corridor unless if it gets a guarantee that a corridor will be opened in Sunik. Sometimes I'm thinking that do the Russians really want a corridor in Sunik or not? My assumption is that Russia does not want, because this is not in the interest of Russia. But sometimes when I'm realizing that Russia is being too soft, actually, and the Iranians were being very proactive, and many Iranians were actually, even in the Iranian newspapers, you can also read that they are asking this question that where is Russia? Does Russia want a corridor there or not? I mean, the Russian foreign minister, Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokesperson, when a journalist from the Anatolia agency, he raised the question about Zankezur corridor, and she said it's not a corridor, it's a trade route, just a route. But on the other hand, I'm not seeing a firm position from the Russians that this is not a corridor and the full stop. The Turks and the Azerbaijanis are keeping repeating that it's a corridor. But eventually, it will not be just a road, because in trilateral statement, it is written that it will be something special, unobstructed transit route where the Russian guards will have a control. So basically, the armies will not have a control there. So it's not even the road. It's something in between a corridor and the road. Unfortunately, we signed something and we don't have any clue what we have signed.
Well, whether it's a corridor or not, as long as the control of that road is not with Armenia, and let's say it's the FSB, it's still
exactly. It's not
extraterritorial to us.
So that's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And the problem is that majority of the Armenians haven't read it, but it says everything there clearly. So basically, I think this was at the same time there were another. I mean, let's not remember when the protests of the so-called environmentalists started. The second day already it was politicized with the demands. There was also demand, for example, dismantling of the Nagorno-Karabakh army. Another demand, for example, the removal of Ruben Vardanyan. It's very interesting when it comes to Ruben Vardanyan. Maybe we can talk it later in detail. That as if there was a fear from the Azerbaijani perspective, the greatest concern or the fear was the Crimeanization or the Abkhazization of Nagorno-Karabakh. That is from their perspective. Of course, this is not what I believe, but what they were writing in the articles and talking, giving interviews, that Ruben Vardanyan is a Russian agent. He came to Nagorno-Karabakh in order to give the region to the Russians. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but this is at least an Azerbaijani concern, and this is why they were, even the Turkish foreign ministry, it called directly that Ruben Vardanyan should be removed from the position, which is very interesting. So every time the Azerbaijanis are putting new conditions to open the Lachin corridor. Maybe this should be actually an opportunity for the Armenians to raise the issue that Stepanakert airport should be opened. If not by the Republic of Armenia, at least the diaspora, the lobbying groups, and also the representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic.
You know, since you mentioned that, I think there's this idea that I would like to promulgate. You know, it's actually doing these humanitarian airlifts. Maybe the Russians don't agree with it. Maybe the Azerbaijanis don't agree with it. But you know, let's shoot down and let the pilot, this be a suicide mission for the pilot. But if our compatriots are starving, and I think it could be done in a way that where it's very transparent, where it's filmed, you know, what's going into these planes. It's inspected on the Armenian side by maybe even Western inspectors or someone who would volunteer to be impartial.
Well, the Red Cross could do it, Hovik.
Or whatever, yeah.
Yes.
And then, you know, hey, we're not carrying any weapons on this plane. Fly it to Stepanakert, let them shoot it down. I think it's a risk worth taking, and you know, it would. I mean, unfortunately, it could possibly be risky for the pilot, but you know, we have 120,000 people almost ready to starve there. So I don't know. There's just one idea that a lot of people are saying, you know, are spreading.
So this blockade also raised the issue that Nagorno-Karabakh cannot live without Armenia. So basically, from the Western perspective, that they were started accusing Azerbaijan that Azerbaijan should open the road. They started realizing that Nagorno-Karabakh needs a road with Armenia. So this is also the positive thing from the blockade that
Yeah, I want to turn our attention to the peace proposal, the so-called peace proposal, I should say. As we noted earlier, Foreign Minister Mirzoyan did not go to Moscow on Friday, but instead Armenia officially forwarded its latest draft proposal to Azerbaijan. Mirzoyan indicated that if Azerbaijan accepts this latest peace draft, it can be signed before the end of the year, so basically this week. In fact, today and tomorrow, Pashinyan is in St. Petersburg, I believe, to attend the informal CIS meeting. What do you think is being discussed in this latest draft of this plan?
Basically, we don't know the details or the content, but what we are talking, or what we are reading in the newspapers and the media, and also what some officials are saying is, both Azerbaijan and Armenian, is that basically the points are similar. It is around the 5 points that Azerbaijanis have introduced, where the respect of territorial integrity and so on, all these things based on international law and so. But the Armenians are also adding the issue of security and the guarantee of the security of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. The Azerbaijanis didn't. They don't want to discuss because they are saying that this is internal affairs of Azerbaijan, because Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh or Armenians of Karabakh are actually citizens of Azerbaijan. So Armenia should not interfere in Azerbaijan's domestic affairs. And the Russians are trying to say that, okay, let's agree on something, but status will be postponed in the future. From the Azerbaijani and the Turkish perspective, the status is already resolved. So basically, we are agreeing on something that we don't disagree. We don't agree, sorry. I don't know whether signing such a document is good or not, but basically Azerbaijan, but we have learned that even the trilateral statement that was going to bring, if not peace, but at least a ceasefire, it didn't hold. I mean, it has been more than 1,000 times, maybe the Azerbaijanis, they violated the ceasefire.
Yeah.
And even if a peace deal is signed, Azerbaijan will not back, because we know that what the aim and the objective of Azerbaijan is to eradicate the Armenians from there. It's not secret anymore.
Right. And interestingly, when we talked to Benjamin Bogosian less than a couple of weeks ago, I think it was the same thing. He said that the closed format of these negotiations doesn't allow us any real details into what these consecutive drafts have in content. Let me turn our attention to the weekend rallies in Artsakh, because yesterday, Sunday, there were mass rallies in Artsakh and tens of thousands of people turned out to demand freedom of movement and reopening of the link with Armenia. The rallies were organized by the government, and State Minister Ruben Vardanyan, whom you mentioned a little earlier, addressed the protesters. He said, I am here, I'm fighting, I'm not going to leave or obey Azerbaijan's conditions. He was pretty clear about this. At the same time, just this past week, Pashinyan's former FM, Zohrab Natsaganyan, said that remedial secession is now a necessity for Artsakh. In the past, Pashinyan's team has said that this should be put as an option on the table. What do you think is being expected from Ruben Vardanyan as the state minister of Artsakh?
Let's be clear. For now, we cannot demand or ask or dream of unification of Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia, to be very clear. This is our main objective. Even if the sword is on our neck, this will be our main ideology and demand, full stop. But when you are head of state, you cannot say Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia and full stop, because we know what happened when he declared something like this. Even I'm reading and watching Ruben Vardanyan's statement, very cautious that we should not go to populism. And it's not I, it is we. We don't need messiahs. Everyone can become a messiah. We need solidarity, whether internally and also between the fatherland and the diaspora. We don't have any kind of solidarity. Everyone hates each other, and this is something clear. And unfortunately, this hatred is not being evaporated. Still, it's there and deeply rooted. I'm not sure what will be the role of Ruben Vardanyan. There's a lot of pressure by Turkey and Azerbaijan to kick Vardanyan from there because they see him as a threat. I'm not sure at the same time what the Russians are aiming by bringing Vardanyan there. Also, I'm not sure what are the clear objectives of Vardanyan. Yes, he can be patriot, everyone can be a patriot, but also the suicidal mission. It's very risky. I respect his patriotism there, and he knows that it's not a very easy job. So basically, each of us should help him, because eventually we are helping Artsakh. We are not helping individuals. But at the same time, I don't want to see another Kochayan or another Sargsyan were using the Karabakh card to come to Yerevan, because this should be not, we should not repeat the same mistakes that we have repeated before. Unfortunately, we are not in the 1990s. We are in very worse position. At least back then we had the 1988 borders and we liberated more areas, but now even we lost the 1988 borders, we even lost the strategic hills. Let's be clear that we have the demographic issue in Nagorno-Karabakh. I don't want to talk this in detail, but we have these demographic issues, and this is the failure after 26 years. We couldn't grow the population there, and now we are facing the problem. Basically, we have to support everything that we can, but I don't see that any change in the status will happen in the near future, because this is not at least in the interest of course, Azerbaijan and Turkey, and not in the interest of Russia, because the Russians cannot now revise
the agreement, the statement.
Exactly, because this means that the change of the balance on the ground should change, and Armenia is very weak here. And the Russians will not fight. They are already fighting in Ukraine, so they will not fight for the Armenians. The Armenians are the ones who are going to fight.
As you were mentioning a little earlier, I was reading over the weekend, some Western-leaning observers do think that Ruben Vardanyan was, quote-unquote, parachuted into Artsakh to take over as a Russian operator, sort of in the manner of Bidzina Ivanishvili in Georgia a decade ago. They think that as Ivanishvili overcame Saakashvili, so now Vardanyan is sent to overcome Pashinyan. It's interesting for me to note that the Azerbaijani leadership is virulently against Vardanyan. They do not like him. They write in their public press about everything from calling him a Russian puppet to discussing his assassination. And nobody, of course, holds Azerbaijan accountable for this kind of talk. Why is Azerbaijan so rabidly anti-Vardanyan? What are they afraid of? I know you said that there's a lot of unknown as to why he is in Artsakh, but what is Azerbaijan's fear in this situation?
The Azerbaijanis are very afraid to talk with anyone from Nagorno-Karabakh. They said that Artsakh Blockade was a terrorist. They didn't want to negotiate with him. And Ruben Vardanyan came, this businessman, and again now they don't want to talk with the businessman because he's an oligarch. As if in Azerbaijan the whole system is based on oligarchy. But the issue is that because also Ruben Vardanyan has he has an excellent PR actually, and we have to take over. And I wish our foreign ministry has a similar PR as a single person has.
Right.
I wish I would see like diplomats and foreign ministers giving to prestigious interviews with prestigious newspapers, and whether in Russia, actually he's giving interviews in Russia, at the same time he's giving interviews to West Armenia. This is something we needed. We need to have a balance so that we need to mobilize the whole population of the world, not just the Russians or the Europeans.
Now you were you were saying that Artsakh Harutyunyan was also labeled a terrorist and everything, but Ceyhun Bayramov last week said that the Artsakh officials used to be a lot more cooperative before Vardanyan came to Artsakh, specifically talking about Artsakh Harutyunyan. So what has changed in Artsakh's approach in talking to Azerbaijan since Vardanyan?
I would say major approach, but maybe because
right, on the surface, I'm not seeing a big difference either, but there must be something.
Basically, when Vardanyan said that we need to learn to, he said something like we need to learn to live next to the Azerbaijan, but not with the Azerbaijani. And this was from the Azerbaijani perspective. Look, the Armenians are again going to secessionism and separatism and so on. But it was very clear that we cannot live with them. Yes, we have to live next to each other as neighbors, and this is the geography, whether we like it or not. But we cannot, because we have seen the examples in Hadrut, in Shushi, and other areas, the provocations, the starvation that is now happening. This is like, like a kind of, it's a genocide. You are pushing the people to leave their house. Even the problem is that they cannot now live everywhere, so they have to starve. And Vardanyan is trying to raise awareness that at least exposing Azerbaijan's true face, and this is what the Azerbaijanis don't want. Also, maybe because the Azerbaijanis are realizing that actually, if let's say Ruben Vardanyan parachuted from Moscow and he is Russian's agent and so on, and then maybe they have fears that actually the Russia will not have a lot of leverage, so they have to eventually maybe swallow Nagorno-Karabakh as it happened in Crimea and other regions. This is the greatest fear of the Azerbaijanis. They are realizing that actually that they haven't won the war completely. They won the battle on the battleground, but not the war. And this also should give us some opportunity to take oxygen and to continue the struggle. We should not give up. So the war has not ended, whether we like it or not. Yes, everyone wants peace, but if the other side doesn't want peace, he wants to kill you, then you have to defend yourself.
On that account, Yeghia, I know you follow India, China, and Iran very closely, and we know that Armenia has been buying some arms from India. Do you think that Armenia has the capacity to engage in any kind of military operations today?
No. because first your soldiers should be trained on these new weapons. This will take months, especially if they are heavy weapons. I'm not talking about light weapons and so on. The more we can try to postpone the war that will come on our hand or our head, the better. Hopefully, I would see also maybe I wish like to see in the future military exercise between India and Armenia. This will also increase the skills of our soldiers, especially the special forces, because as Azerbaijan is doing, we should also invest on our special forces, not just the conscripts and the soldiers on the ground. The same technique that Azerbaijan has done and is integrating its army in the Turkish NATO army. We have to do also the same. We can learn from the Indians and also maybe in the Chinese, and also now the Russians, they have their own war. They cannot maybe help us directly. But with the Iranians, and also why not if some European countries like France, they are eager to help us, they want to help us, then of course Armenia is open to it. Everyone. I mean, let's not forget that there was this idea, especially by some pro-Western Armenians, that because Armenia is a CSTO member, so we cannot get any help or buy any weapons from NATO countries. But this is wrong. Look at Kazakhstan. Like Kazakhstan is purchasing Turkish drones. Kazakhstan also is purchasing Western weapons. Look at Tajikistan. They have even US military base, for example.
Right.
So it's not, if you are CSTO member, it's not that as if your hands are tied and you cannot do anything. You have many options to play, and we have to take advantage of everything is provided to us.
All right, let's wrap up our discussion here. So I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you would like to share with us. Yeghia, anything on your mind?
Well, the dollar now in Lebanon has reached to 47,000 Lebanese lira. A week ago, it was almost 40,000. So suddenly the economy is, I don't know what is happening. It's a miracle or magic is happening, and the Lebanese lira is like rocketing.
For Lebanon, I would say that's usually magic.
Yeah, it is.
There's no explanation for some of these things. All right. Hovik, what's on your mind?
Well, I'll bring you back to Armenian politics. So yesterday on day 14 of the blockade of Artsakh, the wife of the acting de facto prime minister of Armenia makes a very slanderous post against Artsakhis, remembering that 2 years ago in December, they took down a tent city that her foundation had proposed to be put up for the children of Artsakh. This was right after the war. There hasn't been a Christmas tree in Artsakh for the last 2 years, just FYI. And this, I don't know what even to call her, this creature decided that, she wants to have a Christmas tree. And, when every single family in Artsakh is reeling from the effects of the war and has a loved one suffering from it. And she accused the Artsakh Armenians of hiding behind their children. It was a very cynical, very, I don't know what the purpose of it was, but I'm sure that Artsakhis will one day remind this family of their transgressions against our Armenian nation. And just a day afterwards, they took their child to St. Petersburg and paraded her in front of the media. And let's not forget when Pashinyan said that he was ready to trade his son for some POWs, which never happened.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yeghia.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Asbed. All right.
That's our show this week. We hope you found it informative. Now go find us on social media and follow us. We'll talk to you next week.